and we'll turn it over to Mike. So, Mike Verrette, without any further ado, welcome.
Thanks, Pat. It's awesome to be here, and I've known Pat for about 20 years, for better or for worse. And so he and I started talking about doing something like this a while back, and so it's time flies, and here it is. We're already at the end of March, but I'm super happy to be here, and I hope we both can learn something tonight, actually, because there's a lot I'm hoping to learn from you guys as gamers that are playing out and managing disability every day. So, like Pat said, I'd love to keep this as conversational as possible. I can talk all day, so please throw questions in the chat and just interrupt as we go along, because I'd really love to make sure this is interesting for all of you guys and that we get to talk about the stuff that you're most interested in talking about. So I'm going to share my screen, because like any good game developer, I have PowerPoint slides, which is the big myth with game development. It's not all sexy. It's a lot of PowerPoint. All right, is this working? Awesome. Okay, here we go. So I'm just kind of curious about how many of you guys are gamers? How many people with us tonight play pretty regularly? And I'm just trying to get my screen back. Okay. It's sort of interesting, because when I started, I've been giving talks about games, game audio, a lot of different things over the years. And when I first started talking with folks, it was really, really interesting, because I would ask that question, you would get 2 or 3 people in the room that would kind of sheepishly raise their hands, going back 10 or 15 years. And now when you ask this question, almost everybody in the room is raising their hands, just because people are either gaming on phones or more recreationally. It's kind of gone from a thing that's been deep nerd culture to really something that's very mainstream. And so I'm kind of interested, like, for those of you guys that are playing games, what are you playing right now? I can open chat up. Nice, I can open chat up. All right, let's go.
I just got a Switch, and I've been playing like Smash Brothers. And
excellent choice. I see Rocket League. Nice. Anybody else? Mario games? Yeah, you playing the new Mario? There was like a double feature that came out recently, right?
Yeah.
The Mario
re-release.
Ravens game.
Yeah.
With the rabbits.
Oh, Valheim, I've got a friend in the audience. We got to talk later. I just beat third boss last weekend. Deep Rock Galactic. Okay, great. So yeah, lots of awesome games here. R6. What is R6? Oh, Rainbow Six. I'm kind of interested to know a little bit more about why is gaming. Does Atari count? Yes. If you're old enough to have an Atari, it definitely counts. It's kind of where everything started. So for those that are gaming, why is it important to you? Like, what is it that you enjoy about it? Why do you do it? I'll just kind of read some comments as they show up in chat and stuff.
I would just do it for fun.
Yeah, entertainment's huge, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I've always been connected to the industry because of the power it has to kind of take you away from everything and transform, just to create these worlds and then bring you into them, places that really couldn't exist normally. Yeah, socials also. Someone said a lot of new friends and stuff like that. Storytelling, games is a great medium for storytelling. Really huge social networks and stuff through gaming. All that stuff's really important. Just really quickly, talk quickly about my obligatory who I am slide. So as Pat mentioned, I've been in game development for about 20 years. In previous life, I was a recording engineer. I did a lot of TV and radio audio. I was a composer, a sound designer, and around the year 2000, I got to work on my first game, and I instantly fell in love with. I was always a gamer, but I fell in love with the process of making games and how we went about doing that, how you create those worlds. You were playing Twitch things. Sorry, I'm reading chat as this stuff comes up. Is it really turned off? I didn't know that. That was one of the last games I worked on at Harmonix. That's crazy. So I've been doing this for quite a long time and a lot of different roles. I started off doing audio and music, and then have moved into production, creative leadership, and running studios. So the industry's changed a lot in 20 years, and proudly, one of the things the industry has changed a lot in the most recent last couple of years has been it's sort of focused on accessibility and how to get games into the widest group of players possible. So there are really two things that I think about when I think about gaming and disability. One is accessibility, and the other is inclusion. And just to kind of build some common ground in terms of defining both these things, when I think of accessibility, it's really about bringing games to the largest possible audience and ensuring that players can experience as much of that game as possible in a really fulfilling and meaningful way. And when I think about inclusion, I think that's more like those players being able to participate in the game experience, in the game community, participate in the player fantasy in ways that allow them to be represented the way they want, and oftentimes that's as themselves. And I think inclusion is a deep enough topic that really we could spend a whole kind of evening on that. So we're going to set that aside tonight and mostly focus on accessibility. But I did want to acknowledge that inclusion, I think, is a big piece of this, not just for disabled gamers, but also people of all kinds of marginalized groups. And it's something that the industry is putting a lot of thought and effort into in more recent years. So to take a step back and go high level for a minute and talk about, well, how are we doing as an industry dealing with accessibility? I kind of think of things in kind of three parts. The first part is all about education and awareness, right? Do we understand what disabled players want, what their needs are, how they're using games, what controllers are they using, all that stuff. And then from there, I think you start to move into standards and best practices where we start to set rules for ourselves so that we're being able to continually deliver experiences that are accessible to wide audiences over and over again. So that the standout game that was super accessible is no longer the rare thing that you run into. It's what you expect every time you boot up a game. And then from that, once we have a baseline for that, I think it's all about iterating and just improving, right? What are we learning from everyone that's playing, and how can we make things better? It's really early days for us. I think as an industry, we're somewhere, between phase 1 and phase 2, just starting to cross over. And I think there are some groups that have done some really outstanding work in the space and are a little further into phase 2 than a lot of other places are. And we'll talk about some of those groups tonight. But I don't want to kind of get in the weeds here, and I'll share these slides if you guys want to read all the notes and stuff. But in general, I think we've come a long way in the last couple of years, and we have a really long way to still go as an industry. But it's now something that's being talked about a lot and being thought about a lot. And I've been really fortunate that the last 2 studios I've worked at have spent a lot of time thinking about accessibility, and it's something that we always build into our project schedules and stuff as we go. So when I started putting the deck together and thinking about stuff, part of me was curious to dig into, like, well, why all of a sudden is this something that people are paying attention to? Like, what was it that suddenly put the focus on accessibility? Why is this a thing now that the industry is talking about more? I think it's great that we are, but how did we get here? And I think it just boils down to awareness. Like, I think it's about really understanding more about the players that are playing games and what they want. And if you think about any decision you make in game development, it really comes down to three main things. The first is about impact. It's like everything we put into the game, we want to be able to be experienced by as big of an audience as possible, right? There's no point putting out a game that no one wants to play or no one can play. The second thing we always think about is how good is it, right? What's the value of that? Like, we could put stuff in the game, but if it's not fun or nobody's enjoying it, then there wasn't much point to that. And then the third thing you always think about is cost. And I don't always mean cost in terms of money. How long will it take? How risky is it to put in? Will it break the game? And so I think the industry really, around these 3 areas, had a lot of just a lot of thinking that wasn't actually correct. That basically there were a lot of assumptions that we've been making as an industry for a long time that were flawed. The first was that to invest a lot of money into accessible features, we always believe, well, there isn't really that big of an audience. So you're going to put all this time into the game and then not that many players are actually going to be able to use it. And the reality is actually that's not true at all. That in the United States alone, there are 33 million gamers with disability that are playing regularly, active gamers. And I'm sure if you start to look at that internationally, that number is probably close to double, maybe a little less, 50 to 60 million people worldwide playing games. That's a massive number of players that that are out there on Xbox, on PlayStation, on Steam. And so as far as to answer the question of impact, absolutely, there's impact there. You know, by investing in these features, we are talking to a lot of players. It turns out that a lot of the types of things you can do to your games to make them more accessible also make your games better in general. And I think there was this belief for a long time that like, oh, if we make certain kind of changes, it breaks the vision of what the game is, or it makes the game too easy, or it makes the game not the thing that we set out to create. And I think in reality, what people are realizing after seeing great examples of accessible products out there, that accessible games actually end up being better games. And the last piece is cost, and I only bring it up because I think it parallels accessibility in any kind of industry, right? If you think about even renovating your home and making that more accessible, it's always expensive if you wait till the very end and then you do it. But if you plan for it from the beginning and you design it from the beginning, it's a whole different situation. And so essentially what's changed in the industry is just a better understanding of the problem space and the solution and how to move forward more responsibly in this area. And the other big thing that's gotten a lot better is just education. I think there's a lot more people doing research, even in the game space, about accessibility and what it means to be an accessible game. And they're sharing a lot of that knowledge, and developers are reading that and taking that into consideration as they're building. And then also thinking about support and tools improvements. So there's a lot of places out there that are doing education for game developers and building tools. And there's a lot of folks now that are doing accessibility audits for games. So you can hire a group that will go play your game and basically give you a report card on how you're doing in all these different categories. We've done that with a few titles and actually made some real meaningful changes based on that. And then the final thing is that as more and more accessible games are coming to market, us as developers can look at those and then make changes. And as we iterate and continue to make games, start to incorporate all that good stuff. Because the secret to any creative development is everybody's borrowing, everybody's stealing. It's the same in the movie industry and the film industry, is that when there's a good idea, people riff on that idea. And accessibility is no different than any other good idea out there. So when somebody sees somebody do something that's like, wow, that was really amazing, that's going to help a lot of people, then it's very easy to then take that and start to incorporate that into the next game you make, and so on. And so somebody mentioned, what about accessibility with Oculus Quest 2? VR is really interesting because I've worked on a couple of VR titles, and it's pretty wild technology, right? Because as you guys are pointing out, they have eye tracking software now, and there's stuff that you can do in those games that you can't. And I think that the challenge there is that we would have to get to a point where you could start to use that hardware as an alternate controller for a regular game. Meaning, if you want to play Call of Duty, you could just put on the headset and then you could play Call of Duty using that interface or something like that. And I think the challenge now with using VR as an accessible controller is that the game design for VR is still much different than a traditional video game, and a lot of it has to do with where you are within that world and the camera and the optics and how that world gets rendered out. So it's pretty different to build a standard video game for a flat screen and a VR video game where you are at the camera position physically in that environment. But I don't think anyone has really thought yet, because the technology is so new, about how to adapt that into maybe a controller or some of that tech that could be used more regularly on conventional titles. Like someone mentioned eye gaze, and that is something I think some of the early or the later VR systems are doing. And I know they've actually got cameras that'll do it that you can mount on your monitor, and will be able to tell like what section of the screen you're looking at. So I think there's probably opportunity there that people haven't tapped mainstream for using eye gaze technology. And then accessibility in VR games themselves. Yeah, that is a great question about because there is, so you asking because they're tend to be so movement based, because they're doing a lot of hand tracking now that requires a lot of limb movement and movement, and is there ways to do that like Beat Saber? I think that people are thinking about it, but it's not at the same place with traditional games. And I guess the way I say that is the kinds of questions developers are asking themselves when they're developing VR is pretty primitive. They're thinking about like, okay, this is a game that's designed to be played standing up and moving. Can we even get it so that you can play it sitting down on the couch? Like I think that's the leap people are trying to start to make is to figure it out there. And then from there, they've got to go a whole nother dimension to get to the point with like, okay, can we start to accommodate a lot of other things? User interface is particularly challenging in VR because the idea that you're rendering a scene and then you can just put overlay with your health bar and all that stuff on the screen, the way that's all done changes once you're in VR and you're in that scene, because now a lot of these elements that are two-dimensional and are really easy to put on a HUD, you now have to incorporate into the scene in this very complicated way. And so there's just a lot of game design principles in VR that are still being figured out. Before I think, they're still trying to figure out how to build a better mousetrap. And then to be able to take that and apply everything we've learned from traditional gaming into VR, I think is still a whole step we haven't gone yet. And I think, to be honest, I think the industry is still not sure where VR is going to go. Like I think professionally, a lot of us believe that, and I've made a bunch of VR titles and I love the technology, but I think right now it's still too expensive and it's too big and it's too heavy to just wind up on everybody's living room and to become more mainstream. And I think that change has to happen with the technology before we see a lot more VR happening everywhere. And then I think once VR is adopted more generally, I think a lot of the practices that you're seeing from traditional gaming in terms of accessibility are going to start to make their way into the VR space. But I just think it's such a new technology, and even for tech companies, it takes a long time to even take everything you've learned about one part of development and then move that all forward. So I think that's kind of where we are in VR with that stuff. But it's a great question, and it was actually something I hadn't thought much about when I was putting this talk together.
So I had a question. So as far as development, is it easier for you to develop it so like movement or buttons are universal for regardless, or is it easier to make it so you can go in the settings and say accessibility controls? Or
I think, yeah, I don't know if it's harder or easier to standardize all. So you're basically asking, would it be easier to standardize all gaming under one set of controls versus allowing everybody to remap everything all the time? Is that sort of the question?
Yeah. What is easier as far as that? Is it harder to have different, like you press the A button to jump, and then, or you would press a different button to jump?
I don't.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, it's a great question. I think controller remapping is one of the biggest accessibility features that is the easiest to add, actually, because there are. It's not trivial to figure out. I mean, on PC, it's really easy, right? Because you've got a giant keyboard with like a ton of keys. I'm embarrassed that I don't actually know how many keys are on a keyboard. 100, a lot. And then you have mice and all these traditional interfaces that have tons of buttons. I think where it gets harder, right, is when you start to have to map everything out to one of these, and now you've basically got 6 or 8 buttons and a bunch of joysticks and stuff. And you're trying to map all these configurations. But honestly, with the exception of probably very few games I can think of, the game doesn't really care where it gets the signal from. If all the game needs to know is that the player wants to jump, whether the player pushed the trigger to jump or pushed the A button to jump, I think that from a game development standpoint is not nearly as meaningful. There are exceptions. Some of them are immersion exceptions, right? Like if you're playing a shooter game, the reason why there are triggers on controllers was basically because of first-person shooters. It's kind of more fun to push a trigger in than it is to hit a button from an immersion standpoint. But from the gameplay, I don't think it really cares. Some buttons are a little faster to press, like a trigger takes a little more time to depress fully than a button does. So for games where, like fighting games maybe, where milliseconds of timing are really crucial, I could see why developers may want to map certain controls to certain buttons for that reason. But I can't really think of a situation where a game would break when you allow the player to go and remap that stuff in a way that's more comfortable or approachable to them. And I think actually that's the beauty about. We'll talk a little bit about the Xbox adaptive controller, because that was the barrier that they finally broke down and allowed people to kind of remap anything they want, not just any button to any function of the game, but any controller type to any button to any function of the game, which is pretty cool. And we can talk about that a little more later. But did that answer your question, Colin?
Yeah.
Cool. Yeah, it's a really smart observation, because controller mapping is honestly one of the easier things to do from a game development side that helps the most people. And I'm still amazed when I see games that don't even let me remap buttons on my keyboard or anything like that. It's sort of puzzling in this day and age that that's not a common thing that people are building into everything right now. So that's a great segue actually into the next piece of this. So great, the game industry, all these people are thinking about this stuff, but what difference does it make? Like how is all of this thinking and change that's happening in the industry, how does it matter to you guys, right? What are the things that you should start seeing or will start seeing or can start looking at today where this starts to make a difference? And I guess it'd be just really interested to start off by talking to you and getting an idea for like some of the things that you guys as gamers find really challenging. Like, are there things that you struggle with regularly? Are there types of games? Are there particular games that were either really good from this standpoint or really bad? What's it generally like for you guys?
Yeah. And what do you think is the best gaming system as far as accessibility? Would that be the Xbox with the adaptive controller? Yeah. And I guess it depends on disabilities, because you can count like color blindness and stuff too. So.
Yeah, no, it's an excellent question. I think that this generation, so the new Xbox Series console, the new PlayStation 5 console, it's really the first generation of consoles where they've clearly put some thought into accessibility. Like there's a bunch of native speech to text, text to speech features. Some of that stuff's been patched into the current generation, or I guess at this point it's previous generation, if you're lucky enough to be able to find a PlayStation anywhere these days. I still haven't been able to buy one myself. They're still sold out everywhere. But yeah, I think as far as which one's more accessible, I think probably Xbox, because they've invested in that adaptive controller program, and because it allows you to get pretty much any kind of controller into the ecosystem. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in a few minutes too. But consoles are a little bit like, we call them walled gardens, because it's very hard to get in and out of the console. It's not like PC game development where things are very open, where you can basically buy anything you want off the market, find a driver for it, and then use that in your PC program to emulate any number of things, right? It's why you can use PlayStation controllers and Xbox controllers and all kinds of crazy joysticks with pretty much most PC games. And if they don't support it directly, you can download an app and remap everything in the app, and then everything's great. Because of a lot of the security issues around the consoles, a lot of these devices actually have security chips, and the PlayStation uses a regular Bluetooth protocol to talk between the controller and the box, but Microsoft still has a proprietary wireless chip in every controller. And if you're not encoding all your packets with that security and then decoding it, you can't talk to the Xbox for the controller. And that's the same for wired versus wireless controllers. So what Xbox did was really smart, because what they do is allow anything to be put into that adaptive controller box. And then that adaptive controller box can encrypt everything it needs to and push it into the system and pull it back out. And so that eliminates the need to have to build really expensive communication protocols and have to build that into the device that you're trying to make. And it was a really smart decision for them to go in that direction for that reason. Yeah, somebody else wrote in, biggest challenge with games that require split-second reaction times, require button mashing. Yes, we'll talk about that too.
I
There's
hate
actually
button
been
mashing. So hard.
Yeah, and that's another area where people have started to get really smart with design in terms of, we'll talk about that, alternate control, right? So is it really any different for the game to require you to hit this thing 15 times while you're filling up a power meter versus just being able to hold the button down until that power meter's filled up? Like, not really, right? It doesn't change the game experience dramatically. And I think that's what some folks are starting to realize. And then they're changing and allowing for split control schemes where you could do it this way or that way, or a toggle where you can say, well, instead of button mashing, replace button mashing with a hold, replace button combos with a hold. Jack says it's gimmicky. Yeah, sometimes it is, right? It's kind of an old school thing that people do that goes back to arcades where you heard people like slamming buttons and trying to get something done. Yeah, so that's another good one. Okay, so we've talked about reaction times, we talked about button mashing, we talked about some controller interface stuff. What about anything else you guys run into?
Well, I guess I could say some of them, like for motion controls, that's hard. Yeah. If you have limited arm movement.
Yep. Yeah, motion's challenging because for a controller that's this small, it requires you to do a lot of things, right? So you're holding it and you're working two joysticks at the same time. One generally controls where you're looking, one controls where you're walking, and then all these other fingers are on triggers and buttons, and control schemes have become really complicated. And I think that's a thing where there's still a lot better work we can do. Fundamentally, when you're designing games, we've worked on stuff where we've tried to have single button interaction style games, and I think mobile's really helped in this way, right? Because if you're playing on a touch screen or something, a lot of times they try and make the controls simple, so they're what they call one button control or one touch control. So a lot of these games are designed so you can play them with one finger input or one point of input, whether that's pushing buttons or moving around, and the whole game mechanic is designed that way so that you don't have to be doing multiple inputs at the same time. And I think people are starting to adapt some of that thinking and bringing that back mainstream. I was working at a game at Harmonix about 2 years ago that spent a bunch of months trying to simplify the control and come from a button scheme that was very complex down to, like, how do we get it so that players can play this with one or two buttons? And that was one of the design challenges we were looking at. So complex controller is also another great challenge. Well, that's an awesome list. Oh, wait, one more. Yeah, timing, things that are very timing specific.
Yeah.
So someone mentioned kicking field goals in Madden. There's a lot of that stuff. Sometimes in shooter games, somebody throws a grenade and you have like a split second to pick the grenade up and throw it back. There's all kinds of challenges like that can get put into the game that are very timing specific and challenging. So it turns out that developers have done a lot of thinking about this space, so much so that, as someone mentioned, like early, I think in the conversation we were talking about, well, the disability can take a lot of forms in terms of gamers. There's 33 million people out there in the United States, and that covers a lot of different types of disability. And I think someone here mentioned colorblind, which is a huge one, and also not a very challenging one for developers to accommodate. It's a pretty simple rendering process to allow a filter to remap some colors and stuff so that color blindness is less of a challenge. You can also do that without alternate color schemes and just design. Some of it's just knowledge, knowing what colors look the same for folks with color blindness, and then don't pick those colors when you're coloring all the different elements on your HUD, right? So that's also a direction. But just to kind of walk through really quickly the kinds of things that we try and think about. Mobility is huge. We've talked about that. Range of motion, reduced motion control. But on the visual side, color blindness is one. Reduced visual capability. So there are a lot of folks that are challenged seeing high or low levels of contrast. So when you have really busy photorealistic games, it's very hard for certain elements to jump out. So for people playing shooting games or other games, it's sometimes hard for them to acquire targets and see what it is they're supposed to be aiming at because of visual noise. Photosensitivity is a huge one. So anyone that is prone to seizures or epilepsy or things like that, they can often be triggered by fast flashing and stuff within the screen. And so as a developer, if you're aware of that, you can design a lot of your effects and your post-processing to not have things that rapidly flash during that. There's sort of a understood bandwidth band of how many flashes per second are dangerous for those folks. And you can kind of design your effects to avoid things like that. Audio is another big one. Folks that are hearing impaired, dealing with stuff like that. Sorry, I'm also reading chat. QuickTime events are also stupid. That's from Jack. Yes, they are. I'm not a fan of QuickTime events. And then there's just some cognitive challenges, everything from folks with reduced learning ability, reduced attention span, memory challenges, like having to remember a lot of stuff without being able to go back and see that. Dyslexia is a really common challenge. And so there's been a lot of interesting studies done, and there are now fonts that people have identified that are actually easier for people with dyslexia to read and process. And so I've seen games now starting to offer a font selection where you can choose to switch the font to a more dyslexia safe or dyslexia friendly font, which makes folks have a little bit of an easier time when they have that sort of challenge. So
what do you think is the hardest challenge to accommodate?
I think it depends a lot on the game, to be honest.
Mm-hmm.
I think, if you're playing a turn-based strategy game where timing is not an issue at all, then there's a lot of things you can allow players to do, or you can change the way players do a lot of things, because at the end of the day, the player makes a decision, they lock it in, and then you advance to the next turn. And so it's not having to happen in real time. So I think honestly, things like fast-paced games, I think, are the hardest. Things like shooting games like Call of Duty and Fortnite and stuff like that, I think, can be challenging. Racing games can be really challenging because there's a lot of split-second stuff, and you can be in a car race that you just spent 15 minutes and you were in first place, and then all of a sudden you made a mistake and now you're in last place, or your car's off the side of the road and you have to start all over. And they're doing really, really smart things with that. I think the Forza series has a rewind function, which is really cool, where like you kind of make a mistake and you hold the other trigger and it rewinds time back, and you can replay that section of the race over and over again. And it's really slick because when you talk about features that make a game better, everyone can use that feature, right? I mean, everybody crashes on the last lap. It's just a thing you do when you play racing games. So to allow players to be able to back up time and retry things a different way, that's awesome. And so so that's a cool thing. Yeah, Jack says he's really into racing games. I don't know if Jack, if you've seen some of those features, if you played Forza and you played games that kind of allow you to rewind and go back and replay sections, and what you think about stuff like that.
Doing the brake and stuff too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, racing, right. I've seen stuff like that too, where they simplify the driving model, right? All the way from, okay, you go from a standard transmission to an automatic transmission to a simplified driving or simplified braking. You can kind of turn off elements where the computer will do some of that stuff, so you can take on a little bit less. So yeah, there's just a lot of different things to be thinking about. And another way we look at some of these challenges too is the difference between access and difficulty. We've kind of talked about that with some of the comments you guys have had. Some of the things you're bringing up are access challenges, right? Remapping controller, having alternate controls, changing your font so it's easier to read, versus difficulty, and the way you fix difficulty challenges, which is offering people to skip QuickTime events, or offering people to have a different kind of save system or rewind system to try things again. I think a lot of games now, especially narrative games or story-driven games, are putting in a story mode where they make the combat and a lot of the other stuff very simple, so that you can just focus on exploring and playing through the world the way you want to at your own pace, and you don't really have to worry about combat and getting killed all the time. And like I said, these aren't just features for players that have a disability. These are great features for players that want to play a game a different way. Like, maybe you're totally into exploration and you don't like the fact that you're getting attacked all the time. Like, okay, great. Now there's another way for you to experience that world. So like I said, I think there's a lot of upside to developers accommodating a lot of these kinds of changes and building them in early on from the design. So I thought it might be interesting to talk a little bit about what is sort of state of the art in terms of game accessibility right now. Like if you look at titles out there that have really kind of, I don't want to say nailed it, but are really making big strides towards making huge improvements. I thought it would be interesting to walk through this game called Last of Us, which was from a studio called Naughty Dog, and they're probably the premier storytelling video game studio in the world. So they do extremely high budget, really deep character design, rich stories. It's edgy. Like I wouldn't let my nephews play this game, but Patrick agrees. But they got a lot of press and a lot of attention when Last of Us 2 came out about a year or so ago, based on some of the stuff they did, and I think a lot of people have tried to learn a lot from that. Yeah, so a bunch of folks are chiming in. I was going to ask how many folks have played Last of Us 2 or some of the other Naughty Dog titles, and kind of curious what you noticed. But I'm gonna show you guys a little bit about what they did on accessibility, and I tried to break it out into those categories that we talked about here: mobility issues, audio issues, visual issues, things like that. So right from the beginning, this game was powerful because when you boot up the game for the very first time, right after you see the name of the game and the studio and all that stuff that pops up, the first thing they do is ask you if you'd like to configure your accessibility settings. And that was awesome because it's like normally when you get into a game, you got to like start digging through options menus to find all the different things that you want to turn on and get the game playable. And like, that's not how I want to spend my first 10 minutes in a game. If I've just been waiting 9 months for a game to come out, I'm sorry.
That's all right. Yeah, I'm like, I do that a lot. I'm like, where's the sensitivity setting? I'm looking for it for like 5 minutes. I'm like, oh, there it is.
Totally. And so they did two awesome things. One, it's the first thing they ask you when you boot up the game is, would you like to configure your settings now, your accessibility settings? And then they take you right to the screen and they walk you through all the stuff. It's like almost like a tutorial on how to set up the game, which is amazing. The other thing they do that was really smart is like this game has something like 50 different accessibility options you can fiddle with. They actually created a bunch of presets based on the kind of challenges you might have. So there's literally like a mobility switch you can flip, and it will like pre-configure 30 different things to be easier for people that have mobility challenges. Or there's like, if you're hearing impaired, you can just select the hearing impaired thing, and it will go and turn on all these features and disability settings or accessibility settings for people with hearing challenges and stuff like that. And I thought, wow, that's really brilliant, because not only do they let you make that decision in the first 10 seconds you're playing, but then they make it really easy for you to like start somewhere. So then you can just flip that switch, go into the game and start playing. And then as you kind of run up against stuff, you can fine tune it as you go, but they get you in the game really fast, and they get everybody in the game really fast. And so I think that was really smart. They have an amazing number of mobility features that are really smart and well designed. And I kind of pasted a few of them here, but the controller rebinding, we talked about that, and they do something really excellent. I have a little video of it I'll show you guys. But even things like auto swapping weapons for you when you run out of ammo because you're shooting and you're in combat and you run out of bullets. Now you got to reload and do all this stuff. But if you have your other gun and it's loaded, they'll just swap it out for you. Gun swapping on this game is like you have to hold a button and pull the thumbstick up and pick the thing you want, release it, and that's like a super time-consuming process. So the ability to like do things very quickly that normally take a lot of time is pretty cool. Things like camera assist, navigation, and traversal assistance. So things like auto climb, auto jump, things that might normally cause you to have to trigger a button. Now you can walk up to a ledge and the character will like step up onto the ledge for you. Simple things like some games have a mechanic where you have to hold your breath to shoot to stop the cursor from moving around. Sometimes they map that to the thumbstick, so you're trying to push the thumbstick around and then aim. It's like a huge pain in the ass to do all that. But these guys, like there's infinite breath now. So they just turn this on, and now you're not going to wander all over the screen when you're doing that. We talked about repeated button presses turning into holds. So anything where they would require you to button mash, they can automatically remap that. Same with combos. So if you have to hit like ABA to do some crazy attack, now you can just hold down the A button instead, and it will execute that same series of events. So I'm going to play a little clip about just some of the options and stuff that they allowed you, just to get an idea for how much customization there is. And this part right here, I'm going to rewind it just for a second, to me is like the slickest design I've ever seen for doing this. And it seems so simple, right? So what they're doing is they're allowing you to tell the game how you like to hold your controller. And then once the game knows that, it remaps the position of all the thumbsticks. So for example, if for some reason you play one-handed, or you play because it's easier to hold the controller upside down, normally as a gamer, you have to then change your brain to think, okay, well, if I want to go forward, I have to push the thumbstick back because I'm holding the controller backwards. Well, what this says is that if you tell the game that you hold your controller backwards, it will automatically make back go forward. So you don't have to manually think about what direction you're pushing the thumbstick in to accommodate for any of that. And that's so simple, right? It's like very elegant. It doesn't. It's probably like 5 lines of code to make it so that you just invert the controls when you change the direction or the orientation of the controller. This is the first time I've seen anybody do this. I've been playing games for close to 40 years. This is the first game I've seen that just like makes that easy for players. And I think it just comes back to, again, awareness and talking to the audience and figuring out like, oh God, there's a lot of people out there that play with their controller sideways or upside down. Well, not upside down, but inverted, like 180 degrees. So like they think it's easier to hold this way for whatever reason. But anyway, I was really kind of blown away when I saw some of the stuff they were doing there. Visual accessibility is really interesting. So being able to do a lot of text to speech. So if you can't see well, a lot of the commands will be read to you verbally. So they have like a machine computer voice that will actually just translate text and read it out to you, and they build it into the game that way. All kinds of enhanced listen modes. I'll play this clip really quickly. I'm not sure if the audio is going to come through or not, but this is what the game starts to look like as you add these modes on. So if you have a hard time seeing, they've reduced the whole environment or a dark environment into almost a black and white, where the enemies and the characters are very clearly identified, and then all the interactable objects you'll see when they start to move around the room are in yellow. There was a bottle over on the right, and I think there's another one when you come around the corner here. The other interesting thing happened right there too. I don't know if sound was working, but right when that stealth option showed up, there was a chime that went off. Like there's an audio cue to let you know that something is a new option is now available for you as a player. And it's super smart. Like I think they do it so well that it almost makes it interesting to want to play the whole game with that kind of filter on, whether you have that visual challenge or impairment or not. It's just it's so well done that it's sort of like, wow, this is kind of a really unique experience where everything is very clear, and how does that change the game? So I thought it was very interesting they did that. And then the same thing with a lot of audio functionality. Calling out things so that if you have a hard time hearing things, they do this little sonar rings where things happen in the world. So maybe you don't catch a sound or something, but then you see these rings and you're like, oh, I should go over there. I shouldn't go over there. Something's happening over there. And so they're able to draw your attention visually, even if you can't hear those sound cues. And they do a lot of different stuff like that. They've also done, subtitling's been around in video games forever, but they subtitle noises and events and combat things, and even throwaway lines that the guard sitting across the street might say that is still super interesting. It might not be part of the core game experience, but it's part of that immersion. And to suddenly be able to allow people to experience that because they couldn't quite hear it because it was muffled or it was too far away, it's a really smart series of design choices that they've made through that.
I have a question.
Yeah, for sure.
How about, like, I don't know if this ever been thought about, but what about like voice control? So like instead of pressing buttons, you could have a person just like say what they want their character to do, and it would do it.
I don't know of anything that's that complex where you could actually like give. I love the idea, right? You like walk into a room and then you're basically like go to the fridge, get a Coke, and sit at the table, and the character would go and like perform complex actions. I do know that when Microsoft was using the Kinect camera, which had a built-in microphone, if you guys had an Xbox 360, the big thing was they had a motion tracking camera. And one of the things that that software did was that the camera had a microphone in it, and the game system could respond to a lot of different commands. And for things like if you're playing a shooter, you could tell it to like go prone, or you could change whether you were crawling or walking, or you could throw grenades with it. And things like that. And unfortunately, the camera just didn't get well received in the industry. It was expensive. People complained that they had to buy it with the device. It wasn't optional. And unfortunately, Microsoft pulled the plug on support for that in this current generation. But I do think that voice recognition is getting way better, and I think you'll see more of it. And there are controllers out. I don't have a lot of experience with them or any experience with them, but there's a controller called a quad stick, which is all breath control, which uses SIP and different breathing functionality and a lip position sensor to basically remap into commands. And I know that they have a module where you can use voice commands also, but I don't exactly know how it works. I assume it's translating basic gameplay functions into button pushes and other things for you. But that's less, I think, a little less mainstream than some of the other things that we're talking about. And I don't know if anybody plays or has experience with that controller or not that might be able to answer that question in terms of how it works. Two PC programs for voice control. And do those will they interface back in with games, or is it primarily for things like word processing and apps and other stuff like that, or are they pretty good for game control? That was from Jake, by the way, who mentioned it does work well on games. Yeah, I'd love to hear more about how they do that and how they integrate it. Because if it's working well on PC, I have to imagine it wouldn't be a ton of work to allow for that kind of support on Microsoft and stuff like that. And so we're getting close to time here, so I'll try and pick things up just so I can get through the rest of that stuff. The other thing I will mention that in Last of Us 2 is they have a lot of accessibility feature in terms of controlling difficulty. A lot of games have, easy, medium, hard, super hard, whatever. But what they did was really, really interesting. That you can basically do that. You can set from, very easy all the way up to like super hardcore. But then within that, you can go in and tune different things as related to like, well, maybe I want it hard, but I just want a lot more health, so I don't mind getting shot at. I just don't want to die all the time. All the way to, I wish it was easier to defeat enemies. I wish it was easier to find things in the world. So every time I pick up something, I get extra health or extra money or extra whatever. And they basically allow you to reconfigure your whole game experience. So you get to play Last of Us 2 the way you kind of want to play Last of Us 2. And I don't know. I'm not so much of a game purist that I don't have a problem with this at all. I think it's great. I think a lot more games should allow you to kind of reconfigure your experience, because I think it will it'll just make the game so much more approachable. Yeah, Adam mentioned this guy, Rocky No Hands, who plays on a quad stick. I actually have him on a slide in a few slides. He's he's now a pro gamer, and he just got signed by a professional esports team, and he like destroys everybody. And I think he's gotten some world records in Fortnite, and I think he's also a Call of Duty Warzone player. But anyway, that's a great segue kind of into controllers and stuff, and you guys probably know a lot more about this hardware than I do. But there are a bunch of companies that making it. I think that the most important thing that Microsoft did is, one, it brought the wall down and allowed a lot of devices to be able to get into the Xbox in a way that they couldn't before because of that security chip and encrypting all the controller data. The other thing they did is they made it pretty affordable. So a lot of this stuff is not cheap, which I'm sure you guys know. The adaptive controller on the Xbox is like $99, which compared to other stuff out there, which is in the hundreds of dollars, I think the quad stick or the quad controller is like $500. I think Ben Heck is this guy who makes these Xbox controllers that are you can hold them in one hand and play them, and I think that modification is like 300 something bucks. So the nice thing about Xbox is that it's relatively cheap in comparison and supports a lot of other different kind of input devices that are also relatively cheap. So you can take this adaptive controller and you can couple it with some of those floor mount buttons and build yourself a whole panel on your floor if you want to do stuff with your feet. And it's pretty flexible in terms of that stuff. Is anyone here using the adaptive controller? Do any of you guys have one?
I use one.
You do? How do you like it?
I like it pretty well. It's really helped for some things. For example, I put a blind like next to my head, so I can hit it with my head.
Yep.
I've actually I just recently figured that out, and it works pretty well.
Cool. Do you use it in combination with a bunch of different kinds of controllers?
I use it along my PS4 controller.
Yeah. Okay. Cool. So Microsoft's also been really good in supporting developers. So I know when they first released this, I called them up and I was like, can you send us a bunch? We'd love to look at including this with the games. And they're really great. They have a program developers can sign up and they'll send the hardware out so you can start to incorporate it into your game. They'll train you up on basically how it works. And so I know right now at Unknown Worlds, we've got we're about getting ready to launch the sequel to Subnautica Below Zero, but I know that one of the first things that's on the list for future patch is actually adaptive controller interface. So we're going to put in native support for this, where we've automatically mapped buttons and different things to the controller for you. So that if you have an adaptive controller, you can select it. It changes a lot of presets and allows you to basically customize how you use that controller with the game. So we're pretty excited to be doing that kind of in a more official capacity, which is pretty cool. And I know we're getting tight on time. So a couple other things I just wanted to mention is that there are a ton of ways to get involved in terms of just awareness and advocacy and to help the games industry become better at this. Some of the stuff is obvious and some of it's stuff that you guys are already doing. I know a couple of people in here have mentioned that they stream on Twitch and stuff, but Discord is a huge platform for gamers. And when I was doing some research for this talk tonight, I was kind of surprised that there was not a big predominant gamers with disability community on Discord. There are a lot of smaller communities, 20 people here, 30 people here, but it seems like that space is just like waiting for the right person to come and build like a much bigger community and pull all these more famous gamers together and get, people like Rocky all together and forming this one big community. So, I think as Discord becomes the mainstream for where gamers are starting to hang out, I think there's a real big opportunity to have a presence there on Discord and to connect with a lot of people there, because it's just so, it's kind of become where gamers socialize. I'm sure a lot of you guys are using Discord for a lot of different game communities, is my guess, if I had to guess. Oh, cool. Sorry, I just saw the post from Milan about using voice commands for buttons on an adapter. Yeah, very cool. The other thing I'll say too is like joining a mod community and then getting involved and helping them. Very few people are developing mods that make a game more accessible, and I think there's a lot of opportunity in that space as well, because a lot of these mod communities have resources there that can do all kinds of things, from just modding a game to allow for alternative keyboard mappings. And so that's a space where I think a lot more stuff can be done, and people can get more involved and really influence the design of games through modding communities. And then there is just a massive amount of people that are going into early access programs and are doing play testing, and they're looking for players, especially players with disability, because they're trying to make the games more accessible and they're looking for that feedback. So if there are games that you like, and those games are especially more independent developers or stuff you see on Steam or early access titles where they're deliberately developing the game with the community, I think there's a big opportunity to get involved and offer feedback on how to make the game better in these ways and stuff. And I think people are generally really receptive to that. And that goes all the way to like working with these accessibility consultants and programs that are trying to connect players and gamers together. In fact, there's a bunch of links in here. I'm sure you guys are familiar with a lot of these organizations. Some of them you may not have heard of before, but particularly Able Gamers has a work group called Accessible Gamers Groups, and they do 3 primary things. They do training for game developers to make them aware of a lot of the challenges and stuff that we've talked about today and how to design for them. But the other thing they do is they allow studios to sign up for feedback and allow gamers to volunteer to play the games and give that feedback. And so they're actually connecting players with studios that want to get better at this. And right off of their main page, there's actually a button to like sign up, and you basically go. And then as games get put into the system, they reach out, contact people, and then you can basically get to play the game while it's in development and give feedback and stuff like that. So there are a ton of resources out there and stuff. We're just about out of time, so I'm not going to spend too much time going into here because I'd love to answer any more questions and stuff if you guys want to go a few minutes over. I don't know what the rules are. If Pat just shuts everybody down at 8, like at a bad concert, or if we can go a couple extra minutes. He's shaking his head. So anyway, yeah, I know that's kind of a ton of information. It's a lot to kind of cram into an hour, and I do want to be able to chat with you guys a bit more and answer any questions you have and stuff like that. Oh, you're muted, Pat.
Oh, can you hear me now?
Yep.
I think it's worth also noting that, that Mike is now a resource for you guys in the industry, and he's easy to get via email. And I can get you connected with him in the future too. And if there's something specific that you want to pull out of this talk, I'm sure we could have Mike come back in the future to do something else and stuff like that. So yeah, I mean, we'll take a few questions. And then the other thing too, Mike, if you don't mind, I always tell people they can email myself or Amanda if there are questions in the future. We can get back to you if there's something you want to specifically know about as well.
Yeah, no, totally awesome. So someone asked me, what do I play? I play a lot of stuff. I'm playing Valheim right now. I think I mentioned I'm playing every 6 or 8 months. I get back into Minecraft. Patrick and I actually have a long history of playing some Minecraft mod packs and stuff over the years. So right now I'm kind of dabbling in a couple new mod packs. I played on that. I'm playing a game from a Russian studio. It's called Escape from Tarkov. It's a super punishing, hardcore shooter game, like high risk, high reward. Every time you go to a match, if you die, you lose everything you have, and you basically have to start over. It's kind of like torture, but I'm kind of addicted to it right now. What else am I playing? There's a strategy game, like a kind of a city building game called Dyson Project Sphere or Dyson Sphere Project or whatever. It's kind of like Factorio, where you're building up. It's like kind of a factory sim, tech tree strategy game. That's pretty good. I think that's most of what I'm playing now.
My nephew said, "Don't forget Sea of Thieves."
Oh yeah, that's right. I'm playing a lot of Sea of Thieves too, which also has some pretty cool accessibility functions. They've put a few patches in over the last 6 to 8 months to continue to add on to some of their accessibility features. So if you're looking for a great co-op game, either 2, 3, or 4 people, that's a really fun one if you haven't played that.
Do you have a favorite game series?
Favorite game series? I don't know. It's really hard. I just think I'm playing all the time, and so there's just a lot of stuff that just impresses me that people are doing all the time. I mean, I think we mentioned Last of Us. I think everything Naughty Dog's done in the Uncharted series is just mind-blowing from a storytelling perspective, so they're probably one of the best in the business in terms when it comes to storytelling. For like emergent gameplay and games that kind of tell their own stories, you play them. I mean, Minecraft's great. Jack mentioned it never gets old. That's so true. I think you can always come back to it. There's always something new and different with the mod community. Kerbal Space Program's another game like that for me. If you guys are into science and stuff, it's this crazy indie game that is super niche that I can't believe sold a few million copies, but it's like it's crazy. Or these little aliens, and it's all about astrophysics and trying to get objects into orbit, into space and stuff. And it's a great game. So there's a lot of stuff out there. So yeah, I have a really hard time picking a favorite. There's been so much good stuff over the years. Skyrim's another big favorite. I don't know if you guys are into the Oblivion, Skyrim, that whole series, role-playing games, but those are just giant worlds you can get lost in for hours. I love the work that they do.
Yeah, Mike is being too kind. Every time I see him, he's playing Farm Simulator.
There's Goat Simulator.
There's what?
There's a goat simulator.
Oh yeah.
You just like destroy stuff with a goat.
Oh, yeah, that's a fun one.
That was supposed to be a joke, and then people started buying it, and it ended up, it became kind of a like this weird, I don't know, this weird cult following. It's such a bizarre game. Came out of nowhere.
What game system do you use?
What game system do I use? I have I use them all, partially because of work, because I feel like I have to stay on top of it. But like, I mean, just at my desk here, I have a PS5 development kit. Over here, I have an Xbox Series X development kit. I have a Switch development kit behind my monitor. Then I have a PS4 downstairs. Yeah, so I have a lot of stuff. I play a lot of PC games on Steam.
You have a favorite system? Or?
A favorite system? It changes. Like for a while, I was very like Xbox, and then the last few years I've been back into PC gaming, and I think it just moves around as new titles come out and stuff like that. Adam was asking if there's anything upcoming I'm really looking forward to. It's kind of a dry spell right now. I was looking forward to the new Halo game, but I've been so not impressed with some of the stuff, the trailers and stuff they've released for it. So I'm kind of like, I'm not sure that's going to be
play
great.
as an elite or dual wield anymore.
Oh, really?
They're not bringing it back.
Oh,
but you can knock your enemies off the ring. I'm like, wow. I'd rather do those two other things than that.
Yeah. There's been a little bit of backlash in the industry because they really hyped it up, and then they released the first gameplay trailer, and everyone's like, really? This is what you got? So
I play the Master Chief Collection.
Yeah.
I just play Halo 3.
That's a great series, though.
Yeah.
I'm trying to think what else is. God, I don't even know what's coming out. This is like the slow period. The industry is really busy from like September to January, February, March, and then it gets quiet.
How about Subnautica Below Zero? Is that ever going to come out?
Yes, it in fact is in like 6 weeks, which is why I've been super busy.
That's a shameless plug.
It is.
Mike's company's working on now.
I think our big cinematic announcer launch trailer is coming out on the 13th, so that's the latest fire.
DJ wants to know what your first game system was. Were you an Atari kid? Because I was too poor.
No. Yeah, our family was kind of in a similar boat. In television, ironically, was the thing that my family had, which is we had for a long time, which is around the same time Atari was, but it was these horrible controllers that were kind of designed for, I don't know, for older people or whatever, because you had to hold it, but you had this disc that you had to push in with your thumbs to control it. It was really awkward and not very good. And then after that, I had a Commodore 64, which is probably way too old for any of you guys to remember. Well, Pat probably remembers, but and then my first kind of gaming console, I finally, like about 7 years after everyone else had one, I got a Nintendo, or like the original Nintendo. And then I was mostly playing PC games until I got out of college, and then I bought a PlayStation. I think it was the first thing I bought with my paycheck when I had my first real job out of college. I went out and bought a PlayStation. It was very irresponsible of me, but let's see. Robbie's asking my opinion on Xbox Game Pass. I love Game Pass. I think Xbox Game Pass is one of the smartest things that they have done on that platform. There are so many good games to get, and for the price of like 1 or 2 games a year that you would buy, you can play like literally hundreds of titles. And they recently bought Bethesda, so now all the Fallout games and the Elder Scrolls games are all in Game Pass. They did a deal with EA, so there's a ton of EA Play games now that are all in Game Pass. You could buy Game Pass and never have to buy another game for years, basically. If you, so I love it. I think it's really smart. From a player, from a developer, it's a little scary because subscription service changes the way the whole industry works in terms of the economics and stuff, which could also be its own talk for an hour. So I think there are a lot of dangerous things about people moving to subscription-based game services. But as a player, I think it's brilliant, and I love Game Pass. I use it all the time. I play a ton of games I probably would have never bought, and I find a lot of stuff that I would have never tried if it wasn't free because I had a Game Pass subscription. DJ had a Commodore, but it would never work. Yeah, that doesn't surprise me.
Mike, your nephews also want to thank you for showing them Euro Truck Simulator.
Oh, yeah.
My son Tim has trouble backing up, and I realized that if he had his real license, we would be in a lot of trouble, but that's okay. So I don't, I'm cognizant of your time and everybody else as well. So I want to really thank you for coming on this evening and giving of your time and explaining all this different stuff that's going on in the industry side. I think it's really exciting for all of us to know that the industry is listening to a lot of the concerns, trying to make inroads into making things more accessible, breaking down the barriers. And I know we didn't talk too much about in-game, disabled stuff, but we were going to maybe make that a future thing. But Mike and I were talking about having heroes, that use chairs and different kinds of stuff like that. So it's on the horizon. It's happening. There's a lot of difficulty, and Mike was talking about, in the development of that stuff and the tech that's needed. But that's another thing. So I think the industry as a whole, it's cool to see that you guys are, embracing, different abilities and the way that people interact with the games and the way that the games can be used better. So I think it will definitely be cool to have you come back in the future. But like I said earlier tonight, if you have questions later, you could send them to myself or Amanda, or if you're watching this webinar not live, we could get a hold of Mike and get you some more info if you want. But again, thank you so much for doing this, Mike. It was really great. I hope everyone enjoyed this. I think it was very informative for all of us, and I hope you learned something too, man.
Yeah, no, and like I said, we have a long way to go. This is just the beginning. I think that I'm really happy that it's being taken seriously now. Over the last couple of years, and that the games are getting better and these features are getting built and they're going in. But we're far from, we're far from doing everything we should be able to do with this technology. And like a couple of you pointed out, VR is like this whole frontier that we haven't even really touched. We're still trying to figure out just how to make games on it. Never mind make games really accessible on it. So it's the feedback from you guys that are the things that are going to keep pushing us forward, and you guys challenging us to make the stuff better. That's really going to make a big difference. So so definitely stay active in your gaming communities and definitely be advocating for the stuff that is going to make the games better. Because the more voices we hear, the more seriously we'll take this stuff, and we'll continue to try and get it into more games as time goes on.
It sounds like somebody can start up the Discord to lead the way too. So
I was really surprised. I started going, and there was definitely some groups. They were all pretty small, and I was like, wow, somebody just needs to come in and Lord of the Rings this thing and have the one ring to rule them all and just bring everybody together, because it seems like a great opportunity waiting there. And it's very cool to see some of these folks streaming and be competitive gaming and doing all that stuff, because it's amazing to watch all this stuff. It's really kind of awesome. So thanks so much for your time. I hope this was interesting and useful, and please reach out if you have any other questions. I'm more than happy to answer anything you guys have.
Thank you, Mike. And Ravi, thank you for that comment. I know she just took a shot at me there. Good.
Yeah, thank you.
Nice, real nice. See what happens, Mike? I try to help everybody. Ravi just poops on me.
Yeah.
Sorry about that.
Well, no, it's
sorry, not good. Sorry. I'm not sorry at all.
Because you did it, I didn't have to. See?
Yeah, good.
Yeah. Excellent. All right. Thank you. Verified kill. Yeah, headshot. All right. Thanks, you guys. I'm going to split, and I'll see you guys all at our next meeting in April. And I thank you very much for coming on tonight, ladies and gentlemen.
Yeah, thanks, everyone. It was a really great meeting.
Yeah, thank you.
All right.
Thank you.
Good night.
Guys.
Take it easy. Bye.